Okay, let's begin. I am Lanise Antoine Shelley, and I'll be your host through constructive healing-based conversations designed to empower adoptees and the adoption curious. Through the lens of experts and lived experiences, we focus on alchemizing our stories into maximum social impact. These are the voices who could not speak when they were young.
I just returned from a really wonderful time at the first annual BIPOC Adoptee conference in Portland, Oregon. Yes.
Okay, I missed out on that. A few of my friends, adoptee BIPOC friends, went to it. How was it? Let me know.
Well, and there were some friends as I've been like kind of learning more about you. And this is my first ever podcast I've done. I'm not a big podcast like listener or engager. And so I've been
Oh,
like waiting for like the opportunity I like, honestly. And I really appreciated the way you reached out to me. I appreciate your whole vibe and um really loved all the guests you've had on. I really loved scrolling through, like you have a really big rock star list and a few names were at the conference actually. The conference was like a dream. Um, my mind and my emotions know how to be in community, but my body has been so isolated from community for so long that it was this huge learning experience for my body, learning how to be an experience in community. It was um, it was profound, to say the least.
wow. It was the inaugural conference, correct? Or have they
Precisely.
done it before?
This was the first time.
Okay. Next year, I definitely have to be somewhat a part of it or participate in it, do something for it, because it's very meaningful. And to address what you first said about this being your first podcast, thank you. I'm honored. I've been watching your work and I've attended one of your open mics, and I'm just so inspired by you. And the difference between my podcast and all of the other amazing podcasts out there is that my podcast focuses on how we're thriving, how we've alchemized our trauma, our grief, and now repurposed it in such a way that we can inspire others, motivate others, help ourselves grow, and help us just to flourish in this existence. And so I've seen that in your work, and that's why I wanted to have you on. I was just like, I have to get Ryan on eventually and talk about poetry, because I used to be a poet. I'm no longer a poet. I don't consider myself a poet ever since I read Pablo Neruda, who just finished me. I was just like, there's nothing more to say. 20 love poems and a song of despair. I was just like, okay, there's nothing more to say for me. But when I run across poets, I love seeing their work. I'm inspired by what they're doing, and I get to live vicariously through them now.
Well, and though I think, I definitely understand not actively identifying as a poet, but I think that that's always going to be inside of you as you move forward. That version of you that was a poet in the past will always be present with you, and that way you'll always be a poet in my eyes.
Oh.
And because that your work will always exist in that moment of your life, even if you don't share it with anyone beyond yourself. And just thank you for witnessing my work. Thank you for showing up and participating and thank you for focusing on how we're thriving I really aim to, with my own work, both my activism and my creative work, I really aim to create easy ways for us Black and Brown adoptees to move into that kind of life where we're thriving, where we're approaching everything we're doing from this model from a mindset of abundance over scarcity, as we've been so conditioned to do. I think that particularly for those of us who are transracial adoptees, that we've been deeply conditioned into that scarcity mindset, which I think culturally, societally very much works for those of us who are white. But those of us who are Black and Brown, scarcity mindset just does not work. There's no place where that works for us. And so focusing on how we're thriving, how we're really living, figuring out how to live our best lives is so important to me.
It's so important. And it is the struggle for a lot of adoptees, right?
Mhm.
Because many of us, speaking for myself, feel alone. And hearkening back to your earlier question about what am I inching towards? And right now, I'm inching towards a place where I'm not drowning in my mental health, right? And that is my reality. Like, I have set certain things for myself, pillars that allow me to motivate, activate, get out of bed and say, okay, I have to do this. I have to do this. My plants rely on me. Just naming the things that rely on me, because, or else I will just kind of recede and just pour into the dark places rather than reach for the light. And so that's where my headspace is right now. And I am thankful that it's summer because that helps tremendously with my mental health, right? But it's just like inch by inch, day by day. I'm like, okay, I have this podcast interview to prepare for. I have these projects that I'm working on, and just, strong arming myself to do them and be present for them is the constant perpetual inching that I'm feeling and doing these days.
Let me tell you how proud I am of you. Let me tell you how much I appreciate your vulnerability in that response. And I really appreciate how one of the first things you mentioned was your plants as this thing that is reliant on you, that's dependent on you. And especially as you're talking about this very slow kind of inch by inch, moment by moment movement, I do think we have a lot to learn from our plants, from the pace at which our plants move in that. The thing I was pondering recently, I was like, a plant's not worrying about the poem it did or didn't write. Plant's not really worrying about that. What a plant is worrying about is like, do I have enough water? Do I have enough food? Do I have enough sunlight? Let me do dramatic things to indicate the things I'm not getting and communicate because I can't verbalize it or vocalize it, write it down. And so I'm just so happy that whether intentionally or consciously or not, that you're really embodying that pace, that knowledge of your plants by honoring your rest and your own personal care. Um, it's such my plants myself are such an important model for freedom through focusing solely on myself, because we are designed to be in community. We are designed to heal in community and to understand ourselves in community. And so many times as adoptees, we've existed in these islands, like our house plants and stuff, like where we're like totally dependent on the care the support, the understanding, the care of our white adopters, regardless of whether we have a positive or negative experience. It doesn't really matter. We're fully dependent on their care, on their culture, on their nutrients, which many times are very inadequate for our bodies, for our skin, for our hair, for our emotions, for the complexities and nuance of the experiences we have. And so I just spend a lot of time staring at my plants too, wondering what kind of care they need and how caring for them can really help me inform myself on how to care for myself better, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. One of my good friends here in Chicago, she told me the story of her older sister undergoing chemo. And she kept on getting her sister a plant every time she had to go in for radiation until her sister said, "Can you stop giving me a plant? Because of the chemo in my body, I'm killing the plant." I was just like, that is so powerful on numerous levels. Oh my goodness, because we don't think about that. We don't even consider how the radiation would affect the environment. The person who it has this disease is affecting that environment. And it's a really powerful way of looking at life and looking at how what's going into our bodies, right? It's
Yeah.
helping me, that knowledge helps me to nourish myself because I see my plants in this growing season like thriving. I was gone for 6 months and they really suffered, not just because I was gone and I had a neighbor who would like intermittently water them. And oftentimes I don't think she did, but because they missed me and I have a connection to them. And so when I came home, they looked very like drooping and sad and brown and yellowing. And then now they're like green again. And it's not just, and I like to think this that it's not just the watering and the light, but it's the people that surround them, right? That
100%.
nourish them as well.
Well, they feel your energy.
Yeah.
And it's not just that you water, it's not just that you water and feed them, but also that you nurture them in the different ways that you nurture them and yourself. Because the way we nurture the things around us are the same ways we nurture ourselves. And so and the what an apt metaphor, because the thing about houseplants is usually like, the plants that thrive as houseplants are usually well out of their natural environments. They're not existing in a, like, they don't have to exist in a synergy with the outside, just the
Mhm.
inside. And like um how they can thrive, they can still thrive with that care, but but it's so they're so dependent on the care of whoever the invisible forces which might be taking care of them might be, whether they're cultural or familial or linguistic or whatever it might be. And in our case, in the sun, in the plant's case, water or nutrients or sunlight. And but like also like we as adoptees, like we're so used to existing in isolation. It's kind of what I was saying at the beginning, that my body was just learning how to be in community. And again, I just learned from my plants rather than trying to force the interactions, rather than trying to like get an experience I felt like I had to get, the most, meet, say hi to the most people and experience the most things and um try to um do as much as possible in these moments that feel so precious. um I just like focused on taking care of myself, doing exactly what I needed to do. Like one thing I did for each day of the trip is I wrote myself a letter each morning and mailed it to myself, so I have like my logic. I haven't opened one yet because they're like, so because like I love receiving mail. So this like, I mean, these are literally all from me only. And I love receiving mail, but I have like they're filled with like stickers and magnets and all the different things, like all my bus fares and like, you know, the tags of the tea I drank while I was there and like all these like fun things to carry me back to moments I was there. So like when I'm sad and I'm not in community, for example, I have all these letters to open. I could open one at a time until I feel wonderful again. And with all these reminders of these embodied reminders of what it was like to be in community with other Black and Brown adoptees that hold me and make me realize how badly I've needed that for so long. And rather than focus on like how awful it feels not to be there anymore, for example, which would be very easy to do, I can just focus on how wonderful it was, the expansive things that are unfolding at the pace of my plants, these very slow things that are growing, which I like because the slowness allows me to figure out who I can trust in everything. We can kind of have our slow conversations. I can kind of figure out who's really pushing hard into liberating themselves from their alignments with whiteness and capitalism and those kind of things, and who's really holding on to those things. It becomes quite obvious if you just move with slowness.
Mm.
And I can just connect safely with the safest amongst us. Luckily, I also have this marker of understanding that the darkest brown and the darkest black amongst us are generally the safest. And so we're very visible to each other and we can just
Yes.
find each other. And one thing that was so fascinating for me was just existing in my community, like not virtually. Normally we're connecting virtually, and just to be in person and not have to say anything to each other, but to be able to feel like each other's presence without speaking words within a virtual setting. Like we kind of have to keep the conversation flowing and going, and it does, and it will. But like in person, you can kind of just be in awe of each other's energy, if that makes sense. You can kind of just be like, look at that beautiful plant, but it's like a person.
Look at that monstera. Oh my gosh, the ministration. Yes, I hear all of that. And then those letters. Oh my gosh, I'm just gushing over those letters.
Oh,
That's such a thoughtful, self-loving thing to do. So, have you always written those letters, or did that just come up around the conference?
oh, so my letter writing practice has actually been a huge way of maintaining my intimacy with myself because of the way in which I was removed from my mother and the womb which birthed me so young, and didn't have time to like get that skin to skin contact so that my body just knows how to feel and be connected, you know, like
Yeah.
um that I really had to work really hard to maintain that. I started writing when I was 7 years old, actually in 1989, is when I started writing and kind of keeping these records of my life. And my letter writing practice to myself started shortly thereafter because it helps me feel intimate about myself. When I write like Dear Ryan, Love Ryan, I it makes me feel very deeply connected to myself and very intimately connected to myself. And I can start to like kind of intellectually with my mind and my emotions understand these feelings that my body should hold for me and like feel them um, by holding myself like one thing I've identified about the act of like sending myself a letter is that I like the thing that makes me feel the most held is receiving the letter, not necessarily reading it. So receiving letters, I have letters from people I haven't opened for years sometimes because I just, the act of receiving it is what's so precious to me. And then on a sad day or like there's so many sad days in our lives as adoptees that we do and don't know. We can imagine sad days. We have actual sad days. And so
Yeah.
all of those days arise for me. I just have all these gifts and letters to open, and I like manufacture my own holidays. I'm like, well, today is this day for me. And so I'm going to open 5 letters from this that I've been holding on to for X amount of time. I'll calculate how long I've been holding on to them or something. And these letters are 2.5 years old total or something, and I like open them and receive all that energy. And it just allows me to never sit in negativity because I always have these parts of myself to explore, whether I'm looking forward, because I have no problem existing in the future. I love the future. I love being in the future, but it's so important for me to exist in the present. And as an adoptee, my past is so erased from me. And so in this way, I get to kind of exist by sending letters to myself. I exist in this timeless way. I exist as this past version of myself that was writing a letter to me and to this future version, because it didn't know, my past version didn't know when I would open the letter, because I know I sit with them for a long time. And then I get to kind of ponder who I am in the present as this average of who I was addressing versus who I was when I was addressing myself versus who I am as I'm receiving all those messages, and I'm like, oh, look at how far I've come, or look how far I have to go. And I'm so connected to my own lineage of myself, if that makes sense.
It's so important to be connected to the lineage of yourself, because oftentimes I know I'm guilty of not knowing how far I've come and not really taking into account that I have shifted, I have grown, I have evolved. And the darkest moments of my soul have been when I felt that I had stayed the same. Nothing had occurred that was triumphant or positively earth-shattering for me. It was all just bleak.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then in this way, I kind of get to celebrate, because even when it's bleak, like when I write myself letters, I never write, like I have personally have a hard time. I can't write negatively to myself. I can think so negatively to myself if I stay in my thoughts, like so hard on myself and my thoughts. But when I write, it's immediately like, oh, dear Ryan, I love you. You're so precious. You're so wonderful. Oh, I'm so proud of you for taking a shower, or, whatever I
Yeah.
do. Like that, like in my thoughts, I'm like much harder on myself than that. And so you're absolutely right. What you said is you're 100% exactly there, because then I open these letters and I'm like celebrating myself, and I'm like, because it's a mundane moment. I write to myself about my mundane stuff, because that's, well, like, today I had a ham sandwich or whatever. Like, but then like it takes you back to that moment, and then you get in that moment and you can walk around, and I can really experience myself as I was, but as who I've become. And then I can, once you have a letter in different, you have it forever, so you can read it at different points that you feel called to read your letters from yourself, or my letters from myself, because I don't really know anyone else that does this.
I don't know anyone else either, and I think it's amazing. I want to do that for myself. I have a few friends that will write me letters and who love to write letters and send cards. Something that I do that's close to what you're talking about is I write in my journal letters, just like dearest one. I call myself beloved,
Mm,
and like Morning Star, dearest Morning Star, you know.
such nice names for you.
Yes, just all of these just really sweet, potent pet names to myself. And then,
Yeah.
and as you said, I thank myself for the mundane. You
Oh my
woke
God.
up
Goodness.
today
Yes.
and you are so strong for that. You're so courageous for stepping into today, not knowing what it will unfold, but just accepting what will unfold. All of these things are essential.
Yeah. And that, with this whole understanding that this might not have been it.
I know, I know. But it is reparenting ourselves in a lot of ways, right?
100,
It's
100%.
reparenting. And have
Yep.
you done inner child work?
I've taught my letter writing practice, and my, well, and the other one of my other practices is like this. is my sticker collage work. And so like super into sticker collage work. And like, this is the one I was working on yesterday where I like wrote myself a letter and then I like sticker collage the envelope like as a way of
Wow.
sending it to myself. And the collage in the background is like, you know, drafts of old letters I printed out. And um, so I'm like really engaged with my inner child in this play, like, you know, finding play through creativity and um really engaging myself deeply because I'm like the only parent who might like kind of be safe for myself since I'm not embedded in my lineage. It's the lineage of myself, as I kind of said earlier, and while I really desire a lineage that was my own, I don't get that. And I would rather not just be sad for the rest of my life about that. And so I really just through this play get to engage in myself. I love like engage like a lot of times when I get stuck, I'll immediately switch. If I'm writing by hand, I'll switch from my dominant hand to my non-dominant hand, and I'll just immediately unstick myself. And just kind of write whatever comes out of my left hand for me is my non-dominant hand. And then it's like, oh yeah, okay, that's what it is. And like I always play with that child inside because I've fortunately been able to hold on to my naivety and my sense of wonder and beauty, um, despite a very violent culture of whiteness in which I was raised and immersed. And so how I think it's so we really should like just tend to our bodily needs as adults because like do you want pizza for breakfast and ice cream before you have pizza for breakfast? They're like, yes. And because then you kind of we get to permiss ourselves into being, and we don't have to like engage in like extreme acts of capitalism. So we might believe it, like paying for an experience, paying to talk about something, or paying to experience something so it might be real. I do much more healing work with my inner child through my sticker collages and my letter writing to myself than I could achieve with someone outside of me. And like this over, like this is my journals here, you see, like from
Wow.
1989 up to the present day in reverse chronological order. So I'm constantly my all versions of myself are easily accessible to myself. I'm not scared of any version of myself as I lean into understanding my own transness and my own genderlessness or genderfulness, however I might like kind of feel on a particular day, if I'm feeling more full of the genders or more empty of the genders, that I just have all these versions of myself I can kind of play with and like be like, oh, like little niece Ryan and auntie Ryan and nephew Ryan, Uncle Ryan, and Grandma Ryan, Grandpa Ryan all get to take care of me, you know, in
Mm.
ways. And I really manufacture my family in that way, and make them take care of me.
Yeah.
um,
Well, I've done very much the same in the sense of in the beginning of the day, I'll say, what do you want to do? What will bring you joy today? Especially if it's a troubling day. And then
yes,
I will
troubling
plot
days.
out, yes. And I will plot out moments in the day where I get to frolic. I call them going on frolics on my bike in the
Yeah.
sun.
Oh,
I might pop into uh, a flower shop, buy myself a plant. I might pop into a vintage shop. Like those are the frolics that I gift to myself. And
yes.
yeah, it's so important. Like all
Oh,
of this work is imperative. And that's why you can reflect and you aren't afraid of yourself, Ryan, because you can look back and say, okay, this is what I need now. And you give it to yourself, which is a beautiful thing.
and I want everyone who is a Black and Brown adoptee to be coming along with me. Seriously, because I'm tired of a culture By my most recent calculations, every year it gets longer because half of my life is longer every year. That my adoption has wasted about half of my life, which is currently 21 years of my life. That was 21 years I could have been pouring into the people and the world around me. That my energy, my attention was hyper fixated on having to deal with the negative ramifications of my adoption. And so the more Black and brown adoptees I can liberate at that point of 18, 19, when you're first experiencing life outside of this realm of whiteness and this bubble of white supremacy that exists, whether or not white families are aware they're engaging in white supremacy. These white bubbles exist, that our existences as Black and brown transracial adoptees just makes so obvious in our bodies alone. And so we just like get to move away from it in these ways, in these frolicking ways, in these ways that are the easiest, where we can just put down those heavy things we're holding as immediately as possible with each other, put them down, not in each other, but with each other. We can put them down and walk away from them immediately together into this future we're creating where these things don't exist. That doesn't mean that we don't get to interact with them. We just get to put them down with each other. Like Lanise, in the context of this conversation, we get to put it down. We have both put it, whatever it is, whatever we're carrying, we both put it down fully in the context of this conversation. It will immediately be there. It'll make it, so we'll have to pick it up whether we want to or not eventually. But in each other, in community, we get to put it down. And then once you realize that, which I've realized, the way to pour into myself is to pour into my community, understanding I have to then pour into myself and do exactly what I need to do to take care of myself, so I have the capacity to continue to pour into my community as I do.
I love that distinction, putting it down, not in each other. That is imperative. That is exactly right. And now I understand, Ryan, why throughout your Instagram and throughout some of your interviews, people refer to you as walking poetry. You are you are poetry itself incarnate. Just how your mind works and how you just piece everything that you're observing together is so beautifully poetic and makes sense. It's impactful. Like your aim when you speak is precise and it hits. It definitely hits. And one of the things that I love about your Instagram is you have a bunch of quotes from your poetry.
Yeah.
And I stumbled across this one quote: "Am I destined for a lifetime of dissolving mothers?" That question. And that one definitely resonated with me because I'm currently estranged from my family. And it's going on almost 2 years. And we have tried therapy, but for some reason, my spirit is just like, I need more time. I need more time. And I'm curious what this phrase means to you and what prompted it.
Well, just I am riding that emotional roller coaster with you as you were just speaking. I just felt all this movement inside of me. None of us deserve this, but I'm just so happy we get to chat about it with each other, you know? And when I dissolving, when I go away from myself, I dissolve. I dissolve into pieces. And I always shock myself when I come back to myself because I am surprised I recognize myself because of how thoroughly I've dissolved. And the thing that with that imagery in particular, because I have a very complex very complex relationship with my own adoptive family. And I don't like to consider it estranged as much as I like to say the ball is in their court. I have started a lifetime of conversations and I'm still here. So in less than a lifetime, I've started well over a lifetime of conversations which go unanswered, which I'm exhausted by, which I've put down immediately and completely as I step into my community of Black and Brown adoptees, in which I feel so represented, who make me feel so contained and so held, that it could be something so simple. And in terms of dissolving, the thing that happened to me is with the pandemic happened, and in March 2020, after working for over 2 decades in food service, and kind of by any means necessary, doing what was necessary to get my body, mind, and emotions to be able to survive that through addiction, I was able to look up, and with the quarantine started in March 2020. In October 2020, I got sober from 3 substances. And I then attended my family Thanksgiving on Zoom. So it was all very right in front of me. And I was sober. I hadn't numbed myself with the substances I normally used to interact with my family to make that possible for me. And I realized how much my family was a trigger for my addictions, and I realized how this lifetime movement away from my family, it was time for it to actualize itself. In my sobriety, I saw it so clearly on the Zoom screen. I saw it so clearly through the same Zoom screen. It was in December 2020. I started the Adoptee open mic because I knew I would have to. It started as something completely different then. It was a whole different thing, which I can or cannot get into the history of the Adoptee open mic right now. I don't necessarily feel called to do so, but it started as something else in December 2020 because I knew I needed to build something. If you've heard me speak before, you'll also hear me say that, you know, we're here to dismantle, we're here to take apart and abolish these systems and structures, but that starts with building something, so that when we take apart and dismantle and abolish these systems and structures that are oppressing us, we've built something that can catch us. And the thing has to be community, honestly. So that's why I started the Adoptee open mic. And then the other thing I envisioned and started that year is called Friendcation, or actually that I envisioned that the next year, because a movement away from a family is never linear. It's always complicated. And so like in 21, I went on vacation to the Outer Banks, like this return to the Outer Banks, which is something I also write about because I learned so much from traveling to the Outer Banks. But that I realized I would have to start a new tradition because it's the traditions of my family that I love so much. I love taking care of my family. I love taking care of people. It's one of my favorite things to do. It's why I'm so easy to take advantage of, because I love doing it. And so I realized I had to start a tradition. So I started my Friendcation tradition, which was like kind of to replace Thanksgiving and Christmas, this offering, this nod to friendship. My friendship saved me, and I offering like a respite, like a resting place for my friends through creativity or through shoreside vacation that I can offer to people, to my friends, as a way of being held as my friendships hold me. Replacing tradition, so I have that sense of tradition, that thing to look forward to. It's very hard to do things like what we're doing, because to not be devastated, we have to build so much to hold us. And also we're going through so much devastation, so it's almost impossible to do that work. And yet I find myself with the energy to do it and the drive to keep doing it. And so I, rather than withhold myself as like capitalism and scarcity mindset would have us do, I really aim to keep modeling this generosity, this community-minded this community-oriented mindset, this kind of, globalized thinking that we're engaging in while acting and engaging locally. That's so important. And locally might be our own community, it might be your own body, it might be your own household, it might be your own family, whatever local. It could be like just our brain, it could be just a particular part of ourselves on a day, depending on how zoomed in or zoomed out we are. So what I just strive to do, in short, I just want to save adoptees as much time as possible. Those 18, 19-year-old adoptees, I want to save them that 20 years, the 21 years it's taken me to come back to myself from adoption, so that those adoptees can do the work that we, in our older generation, we didn't have the internet. We couldn't find each other as easily. We didn't have Instagram to connect and start to build. That we get to sit back as the survivors, as the elders of this community, of our communities, and pour our wisdom, pour our knowledge to our storytelling, exactly precisely what we're doing. And then the younger generations, who we saved them the decades of our lives we weren't able to save for ourselves, that they get to start building this world that we should have been fighting for. And in that way, I'm building exactly the world I should have been building. But every single adoptee I save begins to be who starts to like really see themselves and work for themselves and come back to themselves and pull all their energy back to themselves and do that hard work of pleasing only themselves, or learning how to please others through pleasing ourselves first. All these really difficult things to do when we've been conditioned to do so many things in different movements. I can save as many people as much time of that as possible, and we can start fighting toward freedom, toward liberation. One thing that we as adoptees really have this privilege of is access to white resources we kind of fall in line with because of what become our lineages, what become our purchased lineages. And we really know how to use resources creatively because we don't like to be subject to capitalism any more than we already have been in these lifelong ways. And so we really know how to be free. Our adoptees' model of freedom is really powerful and incredible. And I think that the more we create safety, where it's safe for us to consensually tell our stories and our models of survival with each other first, with ourselves first, then with each other secondarily, and then we get to decide if we want to tell it to anyone else. But by that time, our models have already at least saved ourselves, if not others in our communities. And then we become, immeasurable. Then we become like these forces that are unstoppable and are doing the work that we're doing.
Exactly. You and I have the same mission of just closing the gap between breakdown and breakthrough. And as you said, we didn't have the resources, we didn't have the access to technology that we do now. And that's why I'm here doing my podcast, so that I can educate the constellation and adoptees specifically, so that they can break through the miasma. A lot of people talk about coming out of the fog. Michelle Madrid, an adoptee from Great Britain who came on the podcast, talked about, or she coined the phrase, the acronym of FOG, fearlessly observing grief. And I loved that. And I'm definitely in the throes of that, just observing my grief. And we all go through that observation to some extent, some longer than others. And sometimes it becomes more detrimental than it needs to be for adoptees. And if you and I, myself, can mitigate some of that journey, it will change lives. It will save lives, right?
Decades.
Yeah. Oh, decades. Absolutely decades. I want to learn more about the conversation around abolishing policing families. I looked at the website and it's really extraordinary. Are you a part of that organization?
I'm not associated with the organization other than knowing them through the lens of this contest. I was the grand prize winner for poetry for their recent Dream, Create, Liberate imagining a future without family policing contest, which had like a poetry section, a visual art component section, and a fiction contest as well. The contest was to be inspired by Afrofuturism and imagine a future without family policing. And my own work is deeply, deeply, deeply inspired by Afrofuturism. My own activism is rooted in pro-Black activism. Though I was raised in a white family, I was raised in a Black community. And so my models of understanding are very complex and very rooted in pro-Blackness. Even though in my own life, I experienced a lot of bullying, both inside and outside of my household. The thing that I watched and was watching was not who was bullying me, but how those who were bullying me were punished. Whereas those who were white who were bullying me went completely unpunished, while those who were Black who were bullying me were very punished. And I really realized how I was being treated was symptomatic of white culture, of this violent white culture, no matter who it was being enacted by, that the violence was at the hands of a culture, no matter what the color of the hands of the people who were enacting the violence were. Because if you've only been treated with violence, how might you know anything but violence? And ending that violence in bodies like it's bodies like ours. It's always bodies on the edges of gender. It's always bodies that are the darkest brown and the darkest Black. It's always bodies that are dangerously femme, whatever that means. You know, if you're like living in your full femness, we are blamed with putting ourselves in danger, but it's our society and our culture. It's our societies and our cultures which fail us. And I
Learn more
wanted to
about.
say that what Afrofuturism really has inspired me into is my own understanding of endofuturism, which allows me to really remain in this reverential place, reverential and referential, both places to my Black ancestors that have come before me and really laid the groundwork for a lot of these understandings that we get to so easily access and step into today, like Audre Lorde and James Baldwin are two that obviously step into mind. And there's a huge platform I could also name, including Zora Neale Hurston. Then we get to step into these liberated spaces due to the pontification of their work and the reasons they've pontificated in their absences and that kind of thing. And but it's really cool because we get to like enact them in these real-time kind of ways, whereas like Martin Luther King, Octavia Butler really were imagining freedoms that had to be future oriented, no matter how rooted their actions were in the present, because they weren't possible at that time. And so I really feel like as adoptees, we're at a similar place in this because people feel families are so innate. There's so many cultural forces conditioning us to believe what a family is and how a family is structured that is simply not true. It's just a singularized, just one way a family might possibly be. And so I just really loved working with Upend because what they're trying to do is not only push for these things through policy in these actualized in these real ways, push for change in the way that child welfare systems are actively policed and how they're policed against the blackest and the brownest of us disproportionately in actualized ways, but also in an imaginative realm.
Well, this is the season where I'm actually bringing people outside of the constellation onto the podcast. Before, it was only adoptees, really. But there are organizations like Upend that I want to amplify. And I'm definitely going to reach out to them and see if they want to come on the podcast and talk about family policing, because that affects the adoption community directly. And we need to be having these kinds of conversations to educate ourselves about what's happening on the root level. It's not just about, oh, the child is displaced. Why is the child displaced? Let's ask those kinds of questions.
Precisely, and not just working on this surface where we would just be just throwing band-aids or kind of maybe solving one or two problems at a time, but being really getting to that root, which is so much harder and which is exactly where my work lies. Afrofuturism is just so important to me. And the thing about this speculative imaginative realm is that we can really learn how to be, how to refer to and also revere each other imperfectly. We can say, we can make mistakes in this imaginative future realm that we're calling into existence. It doesn't have the same immediate ramifications of the present, the very present day that we're in. When we're calling into a future, we have time to weave it, to alchemize it, to make it this complex interwoven thing that fits all of us, because we're calling, it doesn't have to be perfect from the outset. Like the present day kind of has to be you have got to be ready to go, or the present day is over, which is totally cool because the present day is rather overrated. I love existing in the future, but also we get to exist in the present day. It's why representation is so important. It's why we have to take up space, because our present day is where we are. It is. And though I love existing in the future, and I'm very used to existing in the future, and I love calling forth that future, I get to exist in the present. I get to be comfortable. I get to have an easy, luxurious life.
And I love that for you, Ryan. One of the things that I'm observing as you speak is how intersectional you are and how non-binary you are and nuanced you are as you attack something or observe it or just engage with it, and which is the polar opposite of the adoption industry, which is so binary, right? And that's why it's so frustrating for a lot of adoptive parents to understand what we're going through, because they're stuck in this rigid binary of what I did was good. What the birth families did was bad. So if that wasn't bad, then am I still good? Like all of these very unnecessary, superficial, very religious based
That part.
ideologies, right? And where we want to push the consciousness towards is the nuance, is the intersection of these ideas, because that's where the change happens.
It's why I was so honored to make this my first podcast appearance with you, Lanise, because of with what I could read about your work, because I'm not like you can kind of see like how I have a lot of trains of thought in my head all the time. Like I have like a light day is like 4, a regular day is 9, a heavy day might be up to 15. And I rely on a lot of organization to keep myself in order. So listening to things can be very hard for me to do because I get so inspired and then the pace of listening is so fast, and it kind of lines up with the pace of my thinking, and I can really get carried away in the most delightful ways in my own thoughts. But again, I really am trying hard to exist in my present. I think that one thing that being at the inaugural, the first annual BIPOC Adoptee conference in Portland taught me was how much of life I'm missing out on by not being in community. And parts that were invisible to me because I've never been in representative, reflexive community. And so while I've always needed and craved and had to have human connection, in many ways I've been forced into like inadequate relationships and inadequate connections because I had to have them, but none of them were representative or reflexive of me. And when I asked for that representation and reflexivity, what was held onto violently, conversationally, was something else, was something that excluded me, just to put it briefly and easily, honestly. And so it's why I just think it's why I think we should just put it down and put down what hurts and pick up what feels good. And I've really realized how being in community with the brownest and the blackest adoptees is what feels the best to me. I find the deepest understanding. We pour into each other freely. We pour each other into each other with this model of generosity that frankly, other communities I've been a part of, queer, trans, non-binary communities, white activists, Black and brown activists, everyone has something to learn from intersectional adoptee organizers because as adoptees, we are automatically, even the most normative of us as adoptees are still forced into an intersectional approach. We're really quite a model for organizing, for learning how to meet each other. As I connect with more Black and brown adoptees, a lot of people say to me a similar thing. I'm just learning how to be in community, learning how to show up, learning how to tell my story to other people who finally understand me. Like these are trippy experiences when you tell your story to people, and rather than looking around at like blank, like those glazed over blank looks, to look at like engaged and nods and like cheers and reactions. It can be very hard because we've in our isolation have kind of misconstrued our isolation as our identity. And so we have a hard time understanding ourselves as anything but isolated. And so we really have to learn how to be in community. And so that's why the in-person conference is so important, why your podcast is so important, why my Adoptee Open Mic, the Adoptee Open Mic is so important, is because it's all these different spaces and different ways we can engage with just the act of being in community, the act of storytelling. And it's really why I strongly believe that just being in community and just telling our stories just to ourselves and learning how to be in community is really quite revolutionary for us as adoptees. Because we we've never gotten to do that. And it really means a lot to me how you reached out to me, Lanise. I can't tell you how I like was like, oh yeah, this is the one. And I thought, and then I then I was like, okay, I'll schedule it for tomorrow.
I know I saw that. I was like, oh, I gotta get my life together.
I hope that wasn't too much either, but
Oh
I
no, not at all. Not at all. It's you know what's interesting, Ryan, is that all of this podcast, I'm a one-woman show. I do all the editing,
I can
producing,
tell. Yeah.
recruiting, all
Mhm.
of it. And it is a lot of work, a lot of free labor, but it is so rewarding when I'm face to face with adoptees, when I'm finally face to face with them. Like, we're just like chatting. I become besties with just about everyone afterwards. We're just like, you know, I
Yeah,
spend
I
hours
do.
with them. It's helped me understand what it is that you're saying about healing and community, because I was very much isolated, even though I grew up with another Haitian adoptee. She and I did not grow up close. We're not close to this day.
Yeah.
And I really struggle with the perpetual feeling of aloneness
Mm.
and struggle with my ancestors and God leaving me, abandoning me along with the rest of my family.
Yeah.
And doing ancestral work, doing inner child work, doing all of these really sweet things for myself help mend that rift that I felt as a child of being ripped away from my identity. And so what you're saying is just this whole conversation has been for me for this day and this week, because you're just so easy to talk to. You know what's funny is that as soon as you came on, it was as if you and I have met before. I think because we've observed each other on social
Yes.
media for so long, but we're just like, this whole hour flew by
Blue.
because we were just chatting as humans, with a similar background, who just want the same mission of
Yes.
impacting adoptees a certain way. And so you really felt that energetic collide with this conversation. And I'm deeply grateful you said yes. When you said yes, I was like, okay. I was
It
just so
meant so
excited.
much to me that it was you, and
Um,
that I can tell that you're an organization of one. I see you and I cheer you, and that you're pouring yourself in, like, because you really see the value of community over capitalism. You're pouring yourself into what's important, which is your community.
yeah.
And I can say, well, the Adoptee open mic is it's on the first Tuesday of every month at 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern, from September through May. I also host like letter writing classes. I kind of am doing my first round this year. The one I do from January and February is called Letter Writing as a Spiritual Practice with Ryan Jafar Artes. And I kind of just share some of just very few of my letter writing techniques and kind of implement them. And the first class was so special. The one I just finished was called Letters to Our Homes, where we wrote letters. It was just for Black and Brown adoptees, and we kind of chatted and defined what home was. Each week we met for 8 weeks and wrote directly to our homes from ourselves. It was so beautiful. And the one I have coming up, my third one, is going to be like holiday letter writing. I'm going to do like kind of like an anti-capitalist holiday letter writing class as a way to get back in touch to ourselves. I could encourage people to like reach out to me through Instagram at ryanartespoet about that, like, or to sign up for my newsletter, bi-monthly by Ryan. There's lots of ways to kind of follow what I'm doing. It's all my energy, as you know, Lanise. It's like you kind of get to propel yourself. It's wonderful and it's very difficult. And but because I facilitate it, do everything myself, I announced it only 2 hours before the event. And my logic was that it would be for people who were sitting around and didn't have community. If you had plans, if you had other obligations and like a family to hold you, or you already had something scheduled, or that you had something and you're very present to hold you. Um, and that if you were available for a last minute meeting at 2 hours before a meeting started, that it's a space you would really need, that you're sitting around, that you have this excess of energy and not enough people to talk to. Yeah, you're magic, Lanise. Thank you so much for your conversational prowess, and really proud.